Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Roy Williams. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, and we certainly want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. We organize these kinds of quarterly luncheons for people just like you who want to learn more about current issues in our city and in our region. This luncheon series that we put on provides a chance to get really in-depth into some areas and look at some really exciting developments, probably in areas that you're really not that up to speed on. And we want to show you the tremendous opportunities of growth that are occurring specifically in this one. Bioscience, to many of you, might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about Oklahoma City. But we've had employment gains of nearly 18% between 2001 and 2008, and that's been the prevalence of really cutting-edge and growing opportunities within our market in the bioscience industry. And we're getting national and international notoriety for what's going on here. Over the last decade, we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars invested in infrastructure and in technical support. And right here in this facility, you're seeing this new 8-story research tower and all of the other facilities surrounding it. These developments, like many others around here, are continuing to be the impetus to the growth and the success of our bioscience industry. Our speakers today are at the forefront of the research that we're talking about, and that is transforming their specific fields and acting as the catalyst of the type of growth that our region's bioscience industry sees on a day-to-day basis. I know we're all looking forward to hearing their insights into how their specific efforts are not only strengthening our economy, but really changing lives of Oklahomans. So before we get started, I'd like to take just a moment to recognize today's series signature event sponsor, Cox Business. Would Randy Chandler, Vice President of Cox Business, please come forward for a few comments? Randy.
I will make my comments quick, but it's good to see you all here today, and we are very pleased to be the sponsor for the Breaking Through Luncheon today. We, like you, invest in the vision of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber to continually enhance the community and the business climate that we all work in. And one of our city's largest economic growth engines, as Roy mentioned, is biomedicine. And biomedicine is a true pillar of the economy and one that we all know will become more increasingly important as we become more a knowledge-based economy. Just a couple statistics I saw, it's kind of like what Roy had already mentioned about the growth. When we look here, we see that there are 27,800 employees at the last count that are employed in the industry, and there are 358 different enterprises here in the Oklahoma City area. The revenues of those companies are $4.1 billion. So as Roy has said, it's a very important part of our economy. Cox really realizes the significance of that because many of those enterprises and many of those employees are our customers, and we really appreciate that. So we are, much like you, we're very thankful that we have these industries here. We appreciate you coming today, and we are much like you, very much looking forward to hearing from Dr. Prescott about what's going on at the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation.
Thank you, Randy. Please enjoy your lunch. We're going to have a little speed eating, and then we're going to start the program probably in about 15 minutes. So good luck with doing that. We'll be right back. It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Steve Prescott, President of the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation. He is an internationally recognized leader in the studies of basic mechanisms of human disease. He actually is the individual who initiated the largest campus expansion in this foundation's 66-year history at OMRF. Under his leadership, OMRF has built this facility, this 8-story facility, and nearly doubled the size of their laboratory facilities. Please help me welcome our panel moderator and our leader, Dr. Steve Prescott. Steve.
Thanks, Roy, and welcome to everybody, to some old friends and some new ones, I hope. I want to correct one thing earlier. I'm not going to talk about OMRF today. I'm going to pretend to be ecumenical. Many of you heard me talk about OMRF and all the great work that's going on here. You're going to hear a little bit about that, but it won't be the primary focus today. The charge today was to let this distinguished group learn more about the excitement in biomedicine, broadly speaking, in the greater Oklahoma City area. So you're going to hear representatives from different organizations. You heard about, I forgot, what was the number, 370 organizations or something. I didn't know there were that many. But the good news is we don't have someone from each and every one of those because we'd run a little late. But I'm going to introduce them in just a minute so that you're going to hear about a spectrum of exciting work going on in Oklahoma City. In each case, the people you're going to hear from today are real leaders at a national and international level in trying to address unmet medical needs for these very serious illnesses, and you'll hear about as I introduce them. Now, I'm going to do one thing in a sense of introducing, before I introduce them, and then Roy asked me to talk about this room that we're in. It was the Gaylord Pavilion. It's named after the Gaylord Foundation, after a very generous gift during our campaign. And there, you can see there's beautiful artwork. It's the same artist that did this piece that did the bridge, the overpass bridge down on the new I-40 bypass. But then this glass wall that runs around here on the second floor, you'll notice has these etchings of letters in it. And then sometimes those letters appear to spell out names like Lauren LaRue Nettleton right there. Then what follows after that, you'll notice, is an alphabet that gets quite poor and that there are only 4 letters in it, following her name for a while. Same with Joyce Hawley. Then after Joyce Hawley is TCAACGGG. Doesn't spell anything, right? Well, it does, actually. What we did when we were dedicating this building was to do a drawing from among all of our employees. We drew out 27 names, 27 because that's how much space we had. We got a sample of their DNA, and we sequenced a part of one gene, the same gene from each of them. It's a gene that it's involved in the immune system, and we know that that gene varies tremendously in the population. So within this room, each of us would have some variation in that gene. It's almost a fingerprint, if you will. And so, that's the actual sequence, and the DNA code is only 4 letters. So that's the DNA code from that gene, the same gene, from 27 of our employees drawn randomly who volunteered. Now, the metaphor here is that we have this wonderful building that we're proud of with many innovative things about the building itself. It's a LEED certified gold building. It's a very sustainable, green, if you will. We're proud of that building, but the point was that in a research organization, you need a nice building to do the work, but you've got nothing unless you've got the best people. And so the DNA of our people is embedded in the building was the idea here. And that's what you're going to see today as I introduce these distinguished scientists to you to hear about their exciting work. Now, the way this is going to go is that we're going to hear first about an immediate, compelling need and things that are happening now to address this clinical need right now. It can be done tomorrow. Next, we're going to hear about another compelling need where there's a new device is being developed that will help that. That should come on within a few years, we hope. Then we're hearing about another group of diseases where novel treatments, drugs, if you will, are being developed for that, and that'll be about the same time frame, maybe a little bit longer before those are available for patients. And then finally, about a very different type of approach to human disease. Can we repair and replace tissues that are already damaged, kind of restore the body to health through some interventions? And that has a longer timeline. So that's the idea of the program. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists and get it started. The first, and who's going to speak first, is Dr. Ken Copeland. Come on up, Ken, and grab a place. I tell you what, since Jim has already claimed this, why don't you go start on the other end? Dr. Copeland is a professor at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. He's the head of the Division of Diabetes and Endocrinology in the Department of Pediatrics. He's a attending physician at the Children's Hospital, and he leads the Children's Diabetes section of the Harold Hamm Diabetes Center. Those are all his titles. He is internationally known for his studies in childhood diabetes. Most recently, a paper in the New England Journal that addresses this issue of what medications exist today and how to deploy those medications optimally to take the best care of children who already have this tragedy of diabetes that they're coping with to try to diminish the long-term effects. And that's what he's going to talk to us about today. Following him will be Dr. Jim Long, who is the head of cardiothoracic surgery at INTEGRIS Baptist Medical Center. He does all sorts of things to hearts, including change them out now and then, and put a new one in. But his particular research interest is in assisting the heart, putting in devices that kind of boost the function of the heart, artificial hearts, if you will, or partial hearts, and he's an international leader in that. And he and INTEGRIS have spun off a company from their work that's located over in the Presbyterian Research Park. The company's called Vatovations that is trying to develop this commercially. So Jim, why don't you grab that seat next to Ken. Next up in this sequence is Dr. Scott Rawlins. Scott is an alumnus of the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, and he did his research here at OMRF. We're close colleagues of the OU, but we're an independent entity, but we share graduate programs, and Scott's a perfect example of that. He got his lectures and so forth at OU and then came here and did his research work. That led him into a biotech company where he's very successful back on the East Coast, and he's returned back to Oklahoma City to lead a company called Selexys. And they've taken technology that was a license from OU and from OMRF jointly, and they've converted this and developed it into an exciting treatment. The one I think he's going to talk to us today about is a novel treatment for people with sickle cell anemia who have these crises, and it's a medical emergency, so a novel approach to that. So Scott, if you're, and that's fine. And last but not least, Dr. Paul Kincaid. Paul is a senior scientist here at the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation. He's led our Department of Immunobiology and Cancer for many years. Today he's going to talk about an area that he helped develop scientifically, which is about stem cells in our body, so-called adult stem cells. We won't today be talking about anything controversial like embryonic cells. These are the cells that exist in our bodies today and how they can be repurposed. Paul is the past president of the American Association of Immunologists, the president of the Federation of American Societies of Experimental Biology. These are enormous organizations that represent scientists all over the world, and he has tremendous experience both scientifically and in leading new thoughts about horizons in research, and that's what he's going to talk to us about today, about these stem cells. Paul? And with that, first up, and now I've done the only part that's fun now. From now on, I get to be the bad guy who's going to make them stop when at their allotted time. Dr. Ken Copeland.
Thank you, Steve. This is on. It's working a little bit. First of all, let me say, Steve, thank you for this invitation. I'm really deeply honored to be one of the distinguished speakers, or I should say, to be among the distinguished speakers today. I'm really humbled to be a part of this, and I appreciate your asking me to share some of our work with diabetes in children. Is this coming across okay? Good. All right. I guess the starting place is a historical context. 25 years ago, when Steve and Jim and I and other physicians here were, some of the older physicians here were in training for work, type 2 diabetes was defined as adult diabetes, or non-insulin dependent diabetes, and it simply was not seen in children. Children was juvenile diabetes type 1, and type 2 was confined to children, to adults, and virtually never seen in children. Beginning about 25 years ago with the obesity epidemic, with children in our society getting more and more obese, and reaching truly an epidemic proportion in the 90s and 2000s, we began to see an emergence of a truly new disease, and that was adult onset diabetes occurring in children. It typically occurred at the time of puberty. It occurred typically in children that were profoundly obese, in families, in children of families that had, all of whom had diabetes much later in life. But we were ill prepared for this in the late 1990s and 2000s because adult diabetes wasn't supposed to occur in children, and the large armamentarium of drugs that had been developed for the use of type 2 diabetes had never been studied or tested or approved for use in children. So as this new disease began to emerge on the medical scene, we found ourselves totally ill-prepared to deal with it. So beginning in about 2002, a group of us from major diabetes centers across the United States got together and began thinking about a strategy of how can we approach, how can we tell the referring physician, even the specialist, how to deal appropriately with childhood diabetes when it was not classic type 1, but was now type 2. And we convinced the NIH in the year 2002 that they needed to support this novel idea. And this is the Today trial that Steve was talking about, and I'll tell you just a little bit about it. This single NIH-funded trial has brought about $15 million to the state of Oklahoma from outside NIH funds, just for one project. It's one of the largest children's diabetes projects ever funded in the United States. And we in Oklahoma have been the primary movers of this project nationally. And I want to tell you just a little bit about that. First of all, let me tell you the study design. The idea was, well, let me back up. When type 2 diabetes typically occurs to adults, and I'm sure if I did a poll, many of you in this room have type 2 diabetes. You probably got it when you turned 50, 60, end of your career, gained a little weight, got a little pot belly, less active, not enough time to exercise, and you went to your doc and he said, yeah, you got diabetes. And probably referred you to a dietitian, said be more active, you gotta exercise every day, and maybe started you on a pill, hoping that you didn't have to go to insulin shots. So our first question is this the same disease when it occurs in young people, under age 18, in children? Is it the same disease? Can we treat it the same way? So we designed a study that looked at simple diet exercise counseling and the one single oral drug that had been approved or ever studied in youth, in young people, metformin. A simple, typical starting treatment for adults with type 2 diabetes versus a very, very aggressive 2 drugs, including sort of a very, very potent, powerful second drug to go along with the first, versus a third arm, which was a simple single drug treatment plus an intensive lifestyle change. Now, and this is actually where the big bucks were spent nationally for the Today trial, and that was essentially hooking up every child enrolled into this trial nationally, ended up being about 700 kids, hooking them up with a personal trainer, psychologist, cheerleader, that we call a lifestyle change specialist. Essentially your own personal trainer to get you out working out, eating healthy, changing your behavior, the whole idea of unbelievable lifestyle change. Not the concept of advice with a dietitian and an exercise person, but actually effecting a change through assigning a single lifestyle change person. So you can imagine, those were the 3 groups. The simple drug regimen plus a referral to a dietitian, common standard therapy. The very aggressive drug treatment and the simple drug plus the very intensive lifestyle change. And let me tell you about the results. First of all, this study is now over. It's resulted in numerous scores of publications, but the primary results were, as Dr. Prescott noted, a couple of months ago in the New England Journal, and it was really astonishing, some of the things we found. Well, first of all, the children that have type 2 diabetes, let me describe them. They are incredibly poor, they are incredibly overweight, they come almost exclusively from ethnic minority populations, and everybody in the family has type 2 diabetes. That's what the kids look like. Now, the results of the study showed that in contrast to adults, where the simple drug therapy and a referral to your dietitian and encouraging you to be active, that simple therapy it failed miserably. It simply did not work in young people diagnosed with diabetes. It lasted less than a year in fewer than 50% of the patients. They failed very rapidly and miserably. How's my time doing? I'm getting close. 2 more minutes. Okay, that's all right. 2 minutes. Secondly, the multi-drug therapy worked well. And thirdly, and astonishingly, the lifestyle change did not help at all, the simple one-drug therapy. So we were quite surprised by this, and in fact, this study, released in the New England Journal June 14th, actually does make us rethink this idea of type 2 diabetes when it occurs in youth. First, it's much more aggressive when it occurs in kids. Secondly, many of these kids already have complications. They're already getting hypertension, cholesterol, cardiovascular risk problems, kidney failure, a number of these developing early and late complications. And then lastly, we learned something that we now will very practically give to the primary care doc. We can tell you who is going to fail just by looking at the kids. First of all, blacks had a much higher risk of failure than the other ethnic minorities, much higher risk than Native Americans or Hispanics, or much more than the Caucasians. Secondly, we knew that those right up front that had a lower socioeconomic status, either income or high school education or less, were more likely to fail. Third, if you were depressed at the beginning, you were more likely to fail. But the biggest predictors of failure had to do with how quickly you can get your blood sugar under control. We're now analyzing the data even more so that we can disseminate it to the referring docs a bit more completely analyzed, but we have learned so much already in such a short period of time. We are pleased that we have been able to be a part of this here in Oklahoma. We're pleased that we've been able to partner with those who have the biggest disproportionate burden, the Native American communities throughout the state of Oklahoma. And now we carry it forward.
Thanks, Ken. Jot yourself a note about the question you want to ask later. We're going to do that later. He's too modest to say this, but his section enrolled the most patients in the study. It became the leader in the study nationwide and internationally, and his many efforts in that are widely recognized. That he is the voice for children in this area globally now. We can all be proud of what he's done, as well as this big effort here in Oklahoma over the last 10 years. Unfortunately, some of those children are on their way to developing heart failure and are going to be candidates for the type of technology that Dr. Jim Long is going to tell us about.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'd like you to stop eating your desserts and come join me in the operating room. And make believe it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're standing across the operating table in your scrubs and helping me do a heart transplant. You've been there for 3 hours, and for the last hour, you've helped sew in a donor heart. 1 hour ago, a donor heart came into the operating room and was brought to us in an ice cooler in sterile containers, taken out, lifeless, cold, placed in front of us, and you've been helping me for the last hour sew this in chamber by chamber with hundreds and hundreds of stitches. Now comes the moment of truth. It's time to test this and see whether this is going to work. The patient's life up to that point has been sustained on the heart-lung machine. And now we're going to release the cross clamp and let blood flow into the heart. And miracle of miracles happens. It never ceases to amaze me. This heart that's been lifeless for 4 hours now begins to come to life and begins beating. One beat, slowly. Another beat, and then another, and another, and another. It is absolutely a miracle of life, and it is a gift from a donor, a gift from a family, and a gift from God. Heart failure is an absolutely dreaded disease. It's the end-stage ravages of heart disease. And heart transplantation is the gold standard now for dealing with end-stage heart failure, when you have no other chance, you have no other hope, you have no other alternative. It's beautiful therapy. The challenge is it's limited. We still have limitations in terms of the anti-rejection drugs that we have to use and the complications with that, although we've done remarkably well even there. The biggest single limitation is we just simply don't have enough. We've got 5,000 people on the waiting list today, waiting for 6 hearts that are going to become available all across the entire United States. And we should have 50, 100, 200,000 people on the waiting list, but we know we'll never get to transplant them, so we don't even try. What do we have as an alternative? In the late 1950s, some 60 years ago in this country, incredible scientists began a journey trying to develop a substitute for this miraculous organ that was so marvelously designed for us. 60 years we've been in the making, trying to reproduce something. We have marvelous machinery, marvelous technology, and we're getting close, but it's taken us 60 years to try to achieve the design of what we have. Several years ago, 20 years ago, when I got involved in this field, we began using technologies to replace the heart's pumping function. Instead of replacing the heart entirely like the early generations did, we began using heart assist pumps. And this was the very first of the heart assist pumps that we began using about 20 years ago. How would you like that in your body? How would you like to be a surgeon trying to put this in? This is marvelous technology, did an incredible job of bringing life to people. It's called a left ventricular assist device, and it's a form of artificial heart that doesn't replace the heart, but assists the heart and boost it. These were marvelous technologies, but they were big, they were bulky, and they only lasted a year and a half, and they had to be replaced every year and a half. Fortunately, in the last decade, we've evolved to a marvelous new form of technology that's much smaller, quiet, vibration-free, moving away from pulsing pumps with big machines and diaphragms inside of them to much smaller rotary pumps that are continuously flowing. These pumps have a rotor inside of them that turns at 10,000 RPM, but is designed so well that it doesn't tear up the red cells, doesn't tear up the blood. Marvelous support, and today people are living all across this state. We are implanting these in an increasing rate every week. Someone is now receiving one of these pumps, living throughout Oklahoma, Arkansas, southwest Missouri, Kansas, even northern Texas, as a result of a great program built on a great infrastructure that this city has taken great pride in. We know this is impressive therapy that's moved this field forward in a remarkable way, but we know that this isn't the end point itself. It's still big. It still requires a full open chest procedure in order to be able to do this. It requires putting people on a heart-lung machine. So, put our imaginations together and bring a great team of people together with incredible experience in the field and trade out something like this for something like this. This is a heart pump that will pump not quite as much as this, but enough to do remarkably well. And if we get to patients because we're doing it less invasively, with less extensive procedures, with less complications, we're going to be able to get to earlier stage disease before the heart's completely burned out, and we can use it as an assistive technology instead of a complete heart replacement. And if we really get some clever scientists pulling together some neat protocols for building hearts back and recovering them, as you'll hear in just a bit, we may well even be able to use this to support a heart through a very severely diseased state and then recover this heart and build it, rebuild them so that we can take these devices out and take these pumps out. Utterly impressive what's going on in this community. For me, as a 4-year newcomer to this environment, now a true-blooded Okie, I am proud to be an Okie. Indeed, I marvel at what is going on in this community, and it is extremely important. Let me tell you that I am not proud of the fact that Oklahoma is ranked 48th out of 50th in terms of overall health care status. We've got a lot of work to do, folks. And while we can design and develop great therapies and great technologies, I think we as a community need to come together around what it's going to take to give us everything, not just cure, but prevention as well. Some great opportunities. I think Oklahoma City has been phenomenal in terms of helping move the needle the right direction with obesity and some of the risk factors. But I say this to keep this in perspective for you. It's one thing to build beautiful technologies and do great things, provide great therapies for diabetes and other kinds of things that are absolutely essential. It's another thing to take care of ourselves and move responsibility from health care from the government in Washington, D.C. to us as individuals who will do a better job of taking care of ourselves. I truly am proud to be a part of this environment and look to you as leaders and movers and shakers in this community. And Steve, I'm proud to join you and our colleagues here as part of this great bioscience venture that this community supports.
Thanks, Jim. Wonderful. Again, save your questions for later. There'll probably be a line of people wanting to put one of those AAA battery size in their pocket just in case, right? Next, we're pleased to have Dr. Scott Rawlins. He's the president and CEO of Selexys, and he's going to talk to you about a little different approach of using novel insights into our bodies to create a new type of treatment.
Thanks, Steve. As Steve said, I started my career here, born and raised in Oklahoma, went to Moore High School, got my undergrad at OU, PhD at OU, got the opportunity to go to Yale as a postdoc and train in one of the top immunology departments in the country. But I never forgot my roots here. I was very fortunate to work at the OMRF in the cardiovascular department at a time where there were some really groundbreaking discoveries. And my mentor, Dr. Peter Sims, and we discovered a protein that was found to be deficient in patients with a very rare blood disorder called PNH. And this disease, it's extremely rare, even compared to sickle cell disease, extremely rare, a few thousand patients in the United States, tops, probably 10, 20,000 worldwide. But they missed a gene that protected their red blood cells. And that was patented. Fortunately, the infrastructure at the OMRF was very mature even at that time in terms of protecting intellectual property and discoveries. So those findings were patented. I went off to Connecticut, started working on a postdoc, and I ran into a cardiologist, believe it or not, who was very entrepreneurial in nature. His name was Lenny Bell. He wanted to start a company around this technology that we had discovered back here at the OMRF. So I had just received a postdoctoral fellowship that was very difficult to get. And I decided to jump ship from academia and start a new company in Connecticut, and this is in 1992. So from 1992 to 2006, we worked on developing this drug. The drug was approved in 2007 for this rare disease PNH. To date, it's saved literally thousands of lives worldwide. The drug brings in about $1 billion a year in revenue to Alexion Pharmaceuticals. And it also sustains probably 1,500 jobs in the state of Connecticut. And so it's a life-transforming type of a therapy. The problem with it is that it all occurred in a different state, right? At that time, it would have been impossible to raise the kind of capital that was required to get Alexion off the ground and to get that company through to the approval of a drug and to get into the public markets and raise further capital. We spent about $600 million between 1992 and 2007 to get that drug onto the market. Okay, and it just was not possible at that time to raise that kind of money in Oklahoma and really move through that process. So I decided in 2007 that I'd kept my my ties here. Dr. Rod McKeever had made some great discoveries here. He's the chairman of the cardiovascular department here at the OMRF. I decided to come back and take the leadership role of a startup company that he put together back in 2003 to see if we can't do this in Oklahoma this time. He made some groundbreaking discoveries of molecules called Selectins. These are molecules that are on blood cells, and they facilitate the interaction with blood cells and other cell types. Interestingly, they're involved in many disease states as well as in normal homeostasis. And they, they play a role in diseases like sickle cell disease, Crohn's disease, even cancer now. They're finding that these molecules are important in mediating the movement of cancer cells through the body and the metastasis of tumor cells into different organs. So we are primarily focused on sickle cell disease. Our first drug has been put into patients now. So we've conducted a phase 1 clinical trial. We've done this entirely with Oklahoma money and with grants. We've been able to go out and raise almost $10 million locally from high net worth individuals primarily, a lot of physicians that were contacts that I had back in the old days in the 90s. Not a lot of oil and gas money, which is interesting. I have a few oilies in my investment group, but only a couple. Virtually all the other investors are physicians, private practice physicians that understand the science. They understand the risk-benefit ratio of this kind of a company, and they were very willing participants. We've supplemented that money with about $12 million now. We just received word 2 days ago that we got $3 million more from the SBIR program through the National Institutes of Health to support the sickle cell program. So that brings our total of grants to well over $12 million now. So we've raised over $20 million to move our drug development programs forward here in Oklahoma. And now we're really at the precipice. We're at the edge of where a company like this needs to raise a lot of money, a tremendous amount of money. They need to partner with either a large pharmaceutical company or some large venture backing groups. And we are just about to do that. It's going to take probably $30 to $50 million over the next 2 or 3 years, and probably another $300 million total to get this drug onto the market. So it's a very capital-intensive exercise to get these drugs through phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials and to get them approved by the FDA. And so we've been able to attract the kind of capital that will allow us to do that. We're working with multiple venture firms and then a couple of large pharmaceutical companies to bring this to fruition, and it should be something we can announce fairly soon, I hope. So just in summary and in closing, it's great to be back here. It's great to do this time in Oklahoma, again with Oklahoma technology, with a lot of Oklahoma money. The investors in this company will do exceptionally well if this drug works, and hopefully that will serve as a initiating factor for these same people and others to invest in companies like mine locally. And with that, I'll close it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I'll lobby now, Roy, for another day, another breaking out luncheon, where we'll talk about the sort of the business aspects and the need for structured capital in these innovative meetings. One of the biggest, you've already heard, we've got wonderful technology, we've got great leaders. What our biggest need is, and we're not asking for handouts, this needs to be structured capital that's there on an investment basis, and it doesn't exist here yet. Carl Edwards and others of us are working on that right now. Well, now to move to these, like nearly all of medicine, what you've heard about today is using existing medications better, developing novel diagnostic devices to improve care. You've heard about developing novel therapies, life-saving therapies. But none of those approaches directly addresses the issue of repairing our bodies. Generally speaking, medicine today assumes that your body will heal itself if you just stop the disease from progressing, then it's up to you and your body to take care of everything else. We know this doesn't work a lot of the time. That's why Jim has to transplant hearts. That's why these kids don't recover from their diabetes. I'll bet there are people here with bad knees that your body didn't fix on its own, right? So the great hope for the future is an area called regenerative medicine, and Paul Kincaid is going to talk to us about that today, and I think also say a little bit about a unique structure that we're using in Oklahoma to try to make things more efficient and interactive and go farther and faster. Paul?
Well, let me take the opportunity first to thank you for coming here and more importantly for helping to create an environment that's conducive to what we do. You've helped us, you've been our partners in trying to create an environment that's great for science and medical research, and that's absolutely essential for all that we do. Unless you've been hiding somewhere, you've heard a lot about stem cells. And you've heard there's a long list of diseases that are treatable with stem cell-based therapies. And it's true, or it's going to be true in a lot of cases. I've had a laboratory for 38 years, and I have never seen anything like the progress that's being made in the basic science of developmental biology and stem cell biology and other fields. And that astonishing success, which seems like science fiction to me sometimes, has led to the field of regenerative medicine that Steve was referring to. So regenerative medicine and all of this is about stem cells, and you'll be tested on what stem cells are. It's very simple. A special kind of cell that can divide and make an exact copy of itself, and then do it again and make another exact copy. So it has the potential to be expanded to large numbers that you can do something with. But stem cells have another property that's really important. They can turn into something. So some of the stem cells are restricted in what they can do. Like the ones that I study can only make blood. So they're blood stem cells. They're stem cells that are specialized to replace your skin. Your skin's constantly being replaced. The lining of your intestine is being constantly replaced by stem cells of a different kind. And then there are stem cells that can do everything. And with these stem cells, you can imagine how therapies can come from cells that you can direct to become a particular kind of tissue that you might need. The heart, it may be beta cells in the pancreas making insulin, or you can easily imagine the applications. So every medical center, and not just in the United States, but in the world, wants to be players in that game, right? You want to be part of it. And we're part of it. And the reason we're part of it, and a big part of it, and we're in it up to our ears, is that we have friends. We have Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust has decided to help promote adult stem cell research in Oklahoma. And so with a fantastic partnership between OU, OSU, and OMRF, we founded the Oklahoma Center for Adult Stem Cell Research. And it's been in operation a bit over 2 years, and in that time, we've done a lot of things. We've brought expert speakers to our state to teach us and conduct workshops and lecture about stem cells. There have been 17 of them. We purchased high technology, so there's an instrument right 2 floors down here. It's a fantastic microscope that does wonderful things. And we'll be so glad to show it to you today if you have time. We'll do a little tour. We have trained scientists in different ways. We've encouraged recruiting. And one of the most important things we've done is we've stimulated the scientists that are here to consider doing stem cell-based research. Some of them already were, and they just need a little encouragement. And we have awarded 26 research grants. So these are basic science or preclinical science grants to promote research in adult stem cells. So just to give you a few quick examples, let's start with one, which is diabetes. We have 2 projects that are based on diabetes that you've heard about. And this will give you a flavor for what's exciting in stem cell research. There's a technology that is totally non-controversial because it starts with adult cells. It could be skin or almost any other cell type. And you can take those cells and put them in culture and do some magic with them. And what you come up with is something called Induced Pluripotent Stem Cells, or IPS. So right in the building next door, there are two scientists who do this, who take adult tissues and turn them into induced pluripotent stem cells. Those cells are, in effect, the same as embryonic stem cells, which Steve mentioned, have been the source of some controversy. But these are adult-based cells, and they have all the properties of embryonic stem cells, but they're non-controversial, and they can make any cell in the body. So what one of our scientists here is doing is growing them in culture and turning them into what's called beta cells. Now, Dr. Copeland could explain all about what beta cells do, but as I understand, they make insulin. And so this scientist has been able to make these cells in culture make insulin. Now, that's pretty spectacular, but it's not very efficient. You can't expand large numbers of cells. And he's got a lab full of robots, basically what's called high throughput technology, or just a bunch of robots, to find screening for methods to make this work a lot better. He's also taken cells from patients that have a genetically determined form of diabetes called MODY. I don't know much about it, but he's been able to take this cells from this patient and put them in culture, and he's trying to make beta cells out of them and figure out why are these cells so fragile? What's wrong with them? So that's kind of a basic science application of it. At Stillwater, they're studying lung stem cells and trying to learn how to repair lungs. It's connected to smoking-related diseases, COPD, emphysema, drugs like that. There's a team of scientists there. There are a couple of projects that I'm really excited about that have to do with blindness on the OU campus and Dean McGee Eye Institute. There are two exciting projects based on stem cells that are trying to learn how to deal with macular degeneration, age-related blindness, retinitis pigmentosa, and other conditions, infections of the eye that damage the eye. So that's just a little sampling. I hope I'm within time. We can go on for a long ways, and we can give you tours. We can show you around what some of the scientists do. But again, thank you so much for your support and for your participation and for helping to promote medical research in Oklahoma.
I realize we've gone a little bit long, and there is an opportunity for tours of this building. Afterwards, those are brief tours, but if you can't make that, get in touch with us, and we'll arrange for another time for you individually. Now, can we take 5 minutes for questions, or not? Or if you have to leave, get up and leave. But those who want to ask questions for this distinguished panel can answer any question in the world. Yes, ma'am.
People get fat. What is it when you have injectable insulin that seems to make it so hard to lose weight?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. The question was, why does insulin treatment make you gain weight and deposit fat? That happens in all of us. The basic biologic action of insulin is to convert fat precursors, fatty acids, into stored fat. That's what insulin does in all of us. And so if a person goes on insulin, they are essentially giving back to the body a normal physiologic state where they will store fat as well as store protein as muscle, as well as store glucose as glycogen in the liver and the muscle. So in other words, it's a basic property of insulin to create storage of metabolic fuels. Insulin doesn't have to make you fat, it's its biologic effect. So this is an approach that I deal with all the time in my children with insulin-dependent diabetes, they ask me, but doesn't insulin make you fat? No, it doesn't. The idea is to give it back to you at the right amounts and keep you on a healthy diet and exercising so that you stay slender. You're merely giving back insulin, and the insulin biological effect is to store fat. Does that help?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question regarding preventative research, whether it's in gene therapy or any sort of research that can prevent some of these diseases. My second question is there any research still going on in the field of polycythemia?
Does anybody want to deal with exciting issues in preventive research? Ken, this is probably in your area.
Well, I certainly feel strongly about it. If I had had 15 more minutes, Steve, I would have talked a little bit about this. What are the real take-homes from this large trial that I tried to describe? I think the take-homes from the trial are that when diabetes occurs in a very young person because they become so profoundly overweight and inactive, the cow is already out of the barn. The time to treat with preventive medicine, with healthy diet, exercise, is before they get diabetes. That's really the basic gospel message truth of this study. And that is, don't wait till kids have diabetes, treat it through prevention. And if you heard me say that diet and exercise are of no value in youth, boy, you heard me wrong. I sure didn't say that. What I said was that once a child, a 10-year-old kid, gets diabetes, then it's almost too late to turn it around. So that tells me even stronger that we should be putting all of our energy, our emphasis on healthy eating, keeping our kids fit, keeping our kids active every way we possibly can. In schools, in neighborhoods, with healthy, safe neighborhoods, with all the social, environmental things that we can do to prevent diabetes from ever happening.
Here, here. I'll speak to one part of that. He says about genetic testing. So I think that there will be a tremendous amount of effort in the next few years to a decade. There's a revolution. I talked about this DNA sequencing. Many of you know that when we first did the first genome project, that took almost a decade. It cost many billions of dollars to sequence all the DNA from one individual, okay, the first time. We can now do that in a day or maybe 2 days, and it costs $3,000. So it's been a pretty dramatic change. 6 orders of magnitude change in cost and time. So it will be relatively soon that the cost of sequencing all of the DNA from each one of us will be less than $1,000, maybe less than that. Right? And at that point, it will become possible to say, okay, every single gene you have versus every single one she has versus her, and how does this add up to who's at risk of high blood pressure, of colon cancer, in the list. And it'll be relative risks. It won't be absolute you're going to get it. But I believe that this has great promise for people tend to act on good information, right? If you know that you have 4 times the higher risk of something, yeah, you might alter your behavior a little bit rather than if you had the same risk as everybody else. So I think you'll hear a lot about that. It's not quite ready for prime time, but getting close. And the answer to your other question is anybody working on polycythemia, there are several versions of that. Most famous one, polycythemia rubra vera. I don't know of anybody here working on it, but there certainly is a lot of work worldwide. It's a kind of a cancer-like problem, not exactly like cancer, but there's a lot of interest in it. And Paul Kincaid can tell you a lot about it because it's his area of expertise. Yeah.
Dr. Kincade,
Yes.
given what stem cells can do, they can be. That's okay. Given that stem cells can be turned into any other grown,
Right.
is it logical to assume that those stem cells eventually could grow whole organs, whole brand new organs? And if so,
Right.
do you foresee an industry cropping up someday where I can get my own stem cells to grow a pancreas for myself in the event that I might get pancreatic cancer?
Right. This is what I mean by science fiction becomes reality. I mean, it's astonishing. We had one of our visiting speakers from Japan who decided over dinner the night before his talk that he was going to throw away the talk he was planning to give and give us another talk that he'd never talked about anywhere else before. And that work has subsequently been published in Science and other major journals. But he's come up with techniques for actually farming human tissues in an animal, like a pig or something. You could grow a human kidney in a pig. He's done it between rats and mice, grown one species and the other, by a series of technologies based on the kinds of things that I was telling you about. People can make simple monolayers, one layer of cells, or maybe two, or you can construct bladders. That's been done before. But when you get more complicated than that, you start to need structure. And now you're dealing with complexity. So something like a kidney, you can make something that's bean-shaped, but it's not going to have all of the filtering functions and all the vasculature and complexity that a kidney has. So people are looking beyond just making simple one type of cell in culture or one layer of cells in culture to more complex structures. And this involves marrying to another kind of technology in another field, which is bioengineering. We got bioengineers across the street. We got some in Stillwater, and we got some in Norman. And we're hoping that their projects will get mature enough that they'll get support from OCASCR as well to promote that, because now that's looking down the road at a more complex problem that needs to be solved to make whole complex organs.
Dr. Long wants to address this also.
Yeah, the future there is very exciting. Moving beyond these marvelous mechanically engineered devices to biologically engineered devices is really the future. The smarts built inside ourselves is incredible, and it's going to be a long time before we'll ever reproduce that. Let me tell you of a little experiment, just very quickly, to try to grow a heart, if you will. This is a recent development where they've taken a rat heart and infused it with a chemical that dissolves all the cells out of it, leaves nothing but what we call a cytoskeleton, where you've got just the fibrous tissue that normally holds the skells together. It has still the blood vessels in it and the basic skeletal structure there. Infusing stem cells back into that, the stem cells find their way to the right place and begin converting themselves into muscle tissue that will actually begin contracting. And I've seen videos of what looked like nothing but a sac begin to show some life with early contractility, very early. But this is the kind of exciting stuff that's going to happen in the future with regenerative technology.
So I think we all agree that the first thing, we already know about certain types of regenerative medicine. So anybody who's had a bone marrow transplant or a stem cell transplant for a bone marrow for cancer or various other things, that's what we're talking about. It's the simplest form where all we got to do is put some cells back, and the cells do their thing on their own. You're talking about, and he's talking about, when you've got to have an architecture that goes with it, and having a heart cell that beats doesn't do you any good unless it's got a lot of others with it, and it's in the right shape, and it's got the right rate of beating. I mean, there are a lot of things that go on. Same with the pancreas. They're more complicated, and so I think that's going to be the next step on. But there are a lot of excitement in it right now. I think we're going to have to quit now. The panelists will all be around for a few minutes if there are other questions. And I say, what are we going to do if people want tours? How are we going to do that? Just work your way up here. We'll sort you into tours if you want. All right. Thank you very much.